Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to start working on our first ability. I say start because it will probably take a few weeks to complete the ability. Let's get started. The first ability that we're going to work on is an Icicle ability. Here's how it works. It's going to launch a very short range Icicle projectile from our right hand that has a small explosion after half a second. Any enemies hit by the Icicle will gain the cold effect. To increase performance on the server side, we won't be using projectile collision. At 0 seconds, we're going to start an animation montage that'll show our right hand coming forward. At 0.2 seconds, we're going to spawn our fake projectile containing an Icicle particle system. We'll do our first small sphere trace at 0.3 seconds, another small sphere trace at 0.4 seconds, and our final large sphere trace for the explosion at 0.5 seconds. At 0.5 seconds, we'll also hide our Icicle particle system and start our explosion particle system. It's very quick. We're going to be using the fake projectile pattern. If you remember in my Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial series, in video number 5, we started on our first game playability. I think we called it the light grenade, and we used a pattern that I call the fake projectile pattern. This is very common in MMO style games because it's very cheap. It sacrifices accuracy for simplicity and speed and performance. So what we do is we spawn a projectile on the owning client right away. This is client prediction, right? This is before the server has said, yes, you can actually activate that ability. We spawn that projectile right away. This gives instant feedback for our player and provides a nice experience. If the ability activation is rejected, we'll roll back that projectile on the owning client and get rid of it. Hopefully with low lag, this happens pretty quickly, and you might just see a short little flash. You might not even notice anything at all. After it gets to the server, and the server says, yes, you can activate this ability, we'll spawn a different projectile on the server side that will replicate only to proxy clients. So we won't be replicating the server-side projectile back to the owning client who already has a fake projectile, and then there won't be any duplicates. Also, we don't need to replicate the projectile movement, and this is a huge savings. So what will happen is that because there's a predetermined speed and direction, we only have to tell it start the projectile. That's it. That's the only replication that we have to do. We don't have to keep saying, okay, and now we're here, and now we're here, and now we're here, because replicating movement is very expensive. Replicating a trigger that just says, hey, start playing the projectile and have it moving forward at its predetermined speed and direction is very cheap. And that's what we want for achieving max player per server count. So I want to show you two results here that I did. I set up some logs to show the difference between what would happen here under normal replication, which is on the left side, and don't rep to owner. That's what we called it in the Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial series. And so I think in this one I call it HW fake projectile. So what happens in the normal replication is that we spawn the fake projectile on the client side. And you can see that here in this top 2 lines here that are highlighted in blue. It calls the constructor, and then that projectile spawned print string you see there for client 1, that's in the begin play, right? And then on the server side, we spawn the fake projectile, and you can see this in the second thing, the second 2 lines there that are highlighted. And then you can see it says server projectile spawned, which is the begin play. But then in the third 2 lines that are highlighted in blue, you can see that it replicates back to client 1, right? And you can see that it calls the constructor and spawns again on client 1. And that ends up with a duplicate. What you'll actually end up seeing on the screen is you'll end up seeing that there's one projectile followed shortly after by another projectile, depending on how much lag there is. That's not what we want in this case, and so we have the don't rep to owner, and that is on the right side. And so you can see that what happens is that it starts out the same. It's spawning the projectile on the client side, and then in the second one, it spawns it on the server side, but there is no then replicating back to the owning client. Now, it will replicate back to other clients, right? To the proxy clients, it will replicate to those, but it won't replicate back to the owning client. And let's take a look at how we do that. So here is our HW fake projectile. And you can see that we're setting replicates equal to true. We're setting replicated movement equal to false. We're using owner relevancy, which just means that, hey, this is such a short range projectile. There's no reason to use the location of the projectile to decide relevancy. Whoever fired it, just use their relevancy. It's a savings. And then we have only relevant to owner. Well, clearly that's not true. It's relevant to other people, not just the owner. And then if we come down here, you will see that there is a function that we overrided called isNetRelevant4. And if we go to the H file, you can see here we overrode this virtual bool isNetRelevant4, and we override that. And what we basically say here, so this decides whether it's relevant or not, which if it's relevant, it replicates. If it's not relevant, it doesn't. And so if we return true, it would always be relevant. If we return false, it would never be relevant. And instead, what we do is we have a little bit of logic that says, is it owned by the view target? So they're sending in the view target, which means the person we're asking the question of, should we replicate it to view target? And we say, if it's not owned by the view target, then true. So in the case of when it asks the question about replicating it back to the owner, it will say, hey, is it owned by it? Yes, true. And then since there's a not, it'll go to false and it won't replicate to them. So that's how we're handling this. This is the same as the OWS don't rep to owner that we used in the Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial series. We're going to be using a custom ability task that I built just for the Hub World MMO series. And the reason that I did this, I originally thought, oh, maybe I should use the advanced projectile that we had been using. I believe it was maybe episode 38 of the Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial series. We had this advanced projectile. And the problem with the advanced projectile is that it's very complicated and it's very focused on shooter type games where we need absolute maximum accuracy. But it's expensive. And in the Hub World MMO, as I've said previously, we're not going as much for accuracy in combat, but we are going for high player counts per server. And so to do that, I was like, we need something simpler. We need something cheaper. Projectile collision is expensive. And so what we're doing here is we're basically just doing what I call a multi-trace for targets. And what that does is it basically says, hey, create a timeline of traces. And those are the trace steps that you plug in. And those trace steps that you plug in, you can specify like, okay, where is this trace relative to the origin? How many seconds into this timeline does it happen? Right now, it only supports sphere traces, but in the future, there will be different shapes you can choose from. And then it does this trace to try to find targets. And in the future, there will be more options such as applying a different gameplay effect to different traces, deciding to collect them all into one and doing it at the end. Can something be hit more than once by multiple traces, or once it's hit, is that included in the set, but it can't be hit multiple times? There'll be some more options that we add in the future. Because sphere traces are very cheap, this method's going to work really well in our kind of game where we want a high player per server count. I haven't renamed our GA_target testing ability to Icicle yet. In a future video, we'll rename that and we'll figure out our organization scheme, probably, by types of magic, and we'll get all that organized. For now, we're still using this one. And so basically what we're doing here, this inherits from this HW game playability trace steps, which gives us some underlying functionality. There's not a lot there yet. There's going to be more in the future. So we're going to use a method that I often use, which is we start by prototyping in Blueprint, and then later we will make things more generic. We'll generalize things, we'll turn things into variables, and we'll make a C++ template that we can configure and use for a wide variety of abilities. So we commit this ability right off the bat. There isn't any kind of pre-load up or type of stuff. It just commits. And then this is for some testing I'm going to show in a minute. I wanted to make sure that you could see when it committed. So I print a string. We start playing this montage. It's a casting animation where the arm kind of comes forward like you're throwing something underhanded. And then we're going to wait 0.2 seconds. Remember, that's what we said. This is to make sure that the hand has come far enough forward that it looks like it's throwing a projectile. If we did it right away, it just doesn't look as good. And so we're going to delay 0.2 seconds. After that, we will spawn a projectile. This is a temporary node we're using here. This is not the best way to do this. We're going to end up moving this to C++ and do a lot better. But one of the things you may be wondering is, why did I not use the spawn actor task? Right? There's a task. This is a good way to do it, right? Uses the deferred spawning, but there's a huge problem. If you hold your mouse over it, you will see spawn new actor on the network authority server. So this would work on the server side for spawning our projectile that's going to go to proxy clients. Unfortunately, this will not spawn our fake projectile on the owning client. So we were unable to use this. I actually tried using it initially, and I was like, wait, why is it not spawning on the client? And then I saw this note, and so that one's not going to work here. So temporarily, we are prototyping it with the standard spawn actor. This mess of nodes here basically just says, hey, find the origin of the character and basically use the right vector to go 50 centimeters to the right, which is about where our right hand comes forward, and then start that as the spawn transform. This BP ice projectile is our fake projectile, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. We're going to get a reference to that, and I'll show later how we're going to need that to clean it up, right? If we get a reject, we need to roll that back and get rid of that projectile so that it just kind of flashes or goes away before anyone sees it, as opposed to firing that projectile, playing the full sequence of it when it wasn't even supposed to be activated. So here's that custom ability task, wait multi-trace for targets, and it takes trace steps. So if we go here to the trace steps, this matches what we talked about. At 0.1 seconds, but it's 0.1 after the 0.2, so technically it's 0.3, we are going to do collision shape 0, which is a sphere. This is going to be a 50 radius, and it is a 100 forward and 50 to the right. That matches that 50 on the initial transform. The second step is 0.2. This is from the start. It's not from each one. So this is actually just going to be 0.1 from the previous one, but 0.2 from when we start this, and 0.4 from the start of the ability. It's 200, so it's another meter forward. And then on the final one, and you can see that one's also 50 centimeter radius. The final one is 0.3, so this is a tenth of a second after the second one. It is 0.3 after the start of this wait multi-trace, but it's 0.5 after the start of the ability. And this one is a larger, because there's a bit of an explosion, right? And so this is a larger one, and so we're going to do a 1 meter radius, and this one is 300 centimeters forward. So this is basically a spell with a roughly 3 meter range, and also the 50 centimeters to the right. And then here on the end ability, what we do is we say, hey, if it was rejected, meaning it wasn't confirmed, destroy the actor. And I want to show you now what that looks like, along with the normal ability itself. Okay, so here's the ability. You can see it goes forward and it explodes. And if we come over to our test dummy, there it is, doing the 50. I have it just randomizing the crit value, just because I wanted to see what it would look like with the numbers. You can see I made the smaller numbers not go up anymore. I had talked about it in the last video. Just decided, hey, they don't need to be there as long, and they don't need to go upward, right? I thought the up looked odd for what I was going for. So this is basically the ability. Now, I want to show you the logs, because we need to look at what happens on the cleanup. So if we go down and look at the logs, you can see there that it committed on the client, it committed on the server, This is because the lag is very low. So let's set that a little bit higher. So I'm going to come here and do net packet lag, and let's just do something small like 50. 50 milliseconds. And now we'll hit Q. And it didn't actually change the order. But you can see there it's committing on the client, committing on the server, spawning on the client, spawning on the server, and then it explodes. Now, there's actually a way where we can reject an activation. And so what we do is we do ability system dot deny client activations. And I'm just going to put 5. What this does is the next 5 activations will be rejected. This is just for testing. This is for debugging purposes. And so we can see what happens is that, well, so what happened here with the timing is that it hadn't actually created it yet. Interesting on the timing, but you can see that it's not doing anything on the server, right? So I'm going to try going, and now it is again, right? There was the 5. I'm going to try going with a little bit higher than 50. Let's set the net packet lag to 200. Let's see if that works a little bit better. Yeah, here we're getting closer to what I was looking for, where the client is committed, the client spawned, the server's committed, the server spawned. So that's closer to what I was looking for here. And so now we'll go back and we'll do ability system dot deny client activations next 5. And if you look at the log down at the bottom, there you can see what happens. So it committed, it spawned the projectile, then it hit end ability. It was still in a predicting state, and then it cleaned it up. Right, there it is. It's cleaning it up. It's cleaning it up, cleaning it up. One more, and now we're back to allowing it and the ability. So you can see that when we do that, you can see it just kind of flashes. Like the hand starts coming forward, it flashes, but then it rolls back. Now that's 200 millisecond lag, right? So that's pretty high. What's going to happen in the case of standard lag is you're just barely going to see, the person's arm come forward a little bit, and then boom, it's going to get rejected. Now you might be asking, why would it get rejected? Well, the most common reason for it being rejected is that we have some kind of cost. Maybe it's a mana cost, energy cost, whatever it may be that you have to pay. And at any given time, the amount of mana that the server says you have and the amount that your client says you had does not match. And since they do not match, that means that situations may arise. It may be rare, but situations may arise where the client says, nope, you've got enough to activate it, but it gets to the server and the server says, no, you don't. The server wins and goes back and tells the client, no, you didn't get to activate that. But at that point, we don't want it to continue the animation and continue the projectile that didn't happen on the owning client, because there would just be a bad experience, because they'd be like, wait, why didn't it do any damage? So instead, you just see a little bit of a blip, and then you can, we roll that back, and you can continue as normal. Let's take a look at the projectile. So if we come over to projectiles, you can see that this inherits from HW fake projectile. And what we do is, after a 0.3 second delay, not the 0.5, because remember there's 0.2 seconds before we even start the projectile. So the projectile only exists for 0.3 seconds to get us to 0.5. We've got a latch here for exploding. And what we do is we basically set the explosion effect as active, and we hide the projectile effect. You can see the 2 effects are here. So this is the 2 that we've got. This is our projectile. This came from one of the characters in Paragon. And then here, the explosion. Anyway, it's hidden to start, but yeah, it does a little tiny explosion like you've seen. So, and we're using that HW fake projectile. Here's some future modifications that we're going to make to our Icicle ability in future videos. So we still need to apply the cold effect to enemies hit, but that means we have to have a cold effect gameplay tag. We probably have to have some way to visualize that so that there's visual feedback. And then also cold is actually going to apply a very slight slowing effect on enemies hit. And so we'll have to program that as well. Right now, the icicle projectile does not explode early. As you can see here, it actually goes through an enemy because it just goes to the point that it's going to explode. It does not care if it hits something early. So we need to have some logic in there that says, hey, if you hit something in an earlier trace, then just explode right there, and then there's no need to do those additional traces. So if the first or second sphere trace hits, there's no need to do the third one, and we can end out early. So that's something we'll add in the future. The other thing too is if you're running forward, as you can see here, and you fire the projectile, it's kind of not going that much faster than you, and it's almost like you like go right alongside it. And so what we'll be doing in the future is we'll be applying our movement velocity to the base projectile velocity, so it looks right when we launch the icicle while we're running forwards. Also, right now it's just applying, as you can see here, a flat 50 damage. And we're going to end up hooking it up to our damage formula to calculate the damage using our gameplay effect execution. If you have any questions related to this video, please leave your questions in the comments section. The Open World server and Hub World MMO Discord link is in the video description if you want to discuss something in this video further. Like and subscribe to be notified of future videos and to help with the algorithm.